Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our webinar series. My name is Katie, and I'm the Director of Strategy and Partnerships at Mental Health UK, one of the UK's leading charities when it comes to workplace mental health. Now, today we're going to be talking about how to make your unique contribution to our nation's mental health. And over the past year, we've been partnering with ITN to highlight the importance of everyone playing their role in supporting our nation's mental health and to showcase how some amazing businesses have really risen to the challenge. Now, I'm delighted to be joined today by a stellar panel who I'm going to introduce to you one by one. Firstly, I'm going to start with Chris Jones, who is the Director of Support at VCX. Good morning to you, Chris.
Good morning, Katie.
Morning, nice to see you. We've also been joined by John Bacon, who is the Education Solutions Lead at Johnson & Johnson Medical Devices.
Morning.
Morning, nice to see you as well. And we've got your colleague here, Rhoda Steele, who is the Head of Community Impact at Johnson & Johnson.
Hi everybody, morning.
Morning, Rhoda. And finally, we're joined by David Rousel, who is the Head of Community Engagement at Lloyd's Banking Group.
Morning, Katie. Morning, everyone.
Morning. Excellent lineup. Great. So what we're going to be doing with today's session is we're going to be sharing with you some of that content, the showcase piece of our partnership with ITN Productions, which gives you a small sample of some of the amazing things that all of the organisations we've been working with over the year have been doing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open up to the panel to ask some questions and to have a bit of a discussion about what that role for businesses is in our nation's mental health and how these organisations have found not just the journey of going through the production piece in the last year and dealing with COVID-19 and mental health in their workplace, but also their recommendations for any organisation that might be taking on this journey themselves. But before we get started, just by means of a bit of housekeeping, we are recording today's session. And we will send that recording out to everybody who's listening in today so that you can share this onwards with your colleagues and they can watch back, or indeed you can as well. We'll also host the video on our website. There is a Q&A function and a chat function in Zoom here, and we've got an amazing panel, so it's a great opportunity for you to ask any questions that you see fit. So please do send through them to us at any time as we go through the presentation here, and we'll make sure that we protect good time for that at the end. And if there's any links or resources that we're talking about as we go through this webinar, we'll make sure that we send those across to you as well. Now, this is the moment that everybody fears when they're doing live webinars, and that's going to be my attempt here to share with you the video from ITN, and fingers crossed that this works first time for us. I hope you enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to a special showcase version of Forward Together for Mental Health, a programme from Mental Health UK and ITN Productions.
Mental health is a growing public health concern around the world.
From a global perspective, I think mental health is on the same scale globally as climate change.
Life can sometimes be difficult. Isolation, financial problems, bereavement.
From losing my father, the first of 12 deaths in a period of 4 years, that works out one every 4 months. And these were family and close friends who I lost. And coping with them, although I thought I was coping with them and everything else that had happened, in the end I wasn't. I thought this isn't life.
The pandemic has magnified many people's problems, yet it's also led to more people coming forward asking for help, especially men.
Although the pandemic has been a hugely profound and damaging episode, of course it has, for millions of people, one of the positives that arises from it, I think, is that we all understand how to support our own mental health and the mental health of our friends, our colleagues, and our family.
This programme will look at the projects and initiatives across the UK, from elite sport.
I think it's a tough thing to come out and say. You might be struggling sometimes and talk about them things. And if you can do that, I'm pretty sure you can challenge anything that's on the field.
To digital innovation, bringing people together.
Morning, everyone.
At this East London school, young people are learning about resilience.
We need to help each other, especially after the year we've had.
They're on a 6-week course called the Bloom programme, which helps them cope with the transition into adult life. It's run by Mental Health UK and funded by Lloyd's Banking Group.
Statistics show that 75% of mental illnesses will onset before a young person's 18th birthday. So we want to make sure that young people have the tools to perhaps stop their mental health difficulties from deteriorating and developing into something more serious.
Just looking at how to manage your time definitely from a young age helps us.
Together, they plan to expand the Bloom programme and other projects within the financial sector. One of those projects is the Mental Health and Money Advice Service.
There's a huge connection with mental health and debt. We look at the client holistically and try to get them a resolve holistically rather than passing them from one organisation to another organisation.
Grimsby and North East Lincolnshire have higher than average levels of deprivation, with issues around housing, money, drugs and alcohol adding to mental health challenges. So Mental Health UK, with the support from Johnson & Johnson, pioneered a new mental health navigator programme in Grimsby. Teresa Harrison is the UK's first community mental health navigator, linking people to the services they need while reducing pressure on the NHS.
I absolutely love it. It's holistic. It's about the person. It's about gaining their trust and they know they're not on their own. And what I get out of it is seeing that person come out the other side and know that they're going to be all right.
This GP says 40% of the patients he sees have mental health issues, but he has limited time to see them. The navigator role has led to earlier interventions.
It's been fantastic. We've all been blown away about the impact it has had. This care navigation role allows someone to properly sit down with them, often in a different environment, either in their own home, out in a coffee shop, providing a different type of relationship, which allows you to properly get down to what are the other problems that's going on in someone's life.
Johnson & Johnson's mission statement is known as Our Credo. It was first written in 1943. It reflects the company's core values, including recognising the importance of the family and work-life balance.
By creating an environment where people can talk openly about their mental ill health, then firstly you create an environment where someone says, I'm not well enough to be at work today. And so by being able to do that, then people can take the appropriate rest. And so when they do come back to work, whether it's a couple of days later or a week later, then they're a lot happier. They feel more included for being able to have that conversation.
The company's Alliance for Diverse Abilities is a resource group for employees. Group member Sam Treasure won the Employee of the Year award for her work supporting colleagues. She struggled with her own mental health. She found the strength from support from Johnson & Johnson.
That's something so important. If you have leaders and other colleagues that are around you where you can say, this is who I am and here's my story.
Being a leader today is not just about financial success. BP's chief executive, Bernard Looney, is committed to the company's mental health strategy, appointing leaders who demonstrate kindness and business acumen.
The amount of energy that we all spend dealing with all of this stuff in our heads that we're worried about sharing, or that somebody might think there's something wrong with me, if we could help release that and have it be okay to not be okay, which of course it is, imagine the energy that we'd release for people to be able to collaborate and get on with their jobs and focus on the things that we want them to focus on.
A toolkit of digital resources like leaflets, a meditation app and a global employee assistance programme provides practical support, identifying hotspots so that care can be delivered where and when it's needed. Not being okay was something Charlie Wheeler was experiencing. He was given time off for therapy sessions.
I can attend appointments whenever I need to. They make it very clear, and that's one thing I've really noticed stepped up since the start of the pandemic, is if you need help, talk.
I do feel like I just need a little time to kind of just to catch up with everything at home and just get my head sort of back into place.
These specially trained actors are role-playing real-life workplace scenarios where a line manager is listening and talking to a colleague who's experiencing poor mental well-being.
Are you okay?
It's racing.
That's all right, that's okay. Do you want some water or anything?
No, I'm actually...
It's been really interesting, actually, because it's just taken some time out as a manager just to sit and reflect about the conversations that you're likely to have.
The training by Ripple & Co places managers in real-life simulated situations.
So the idea is you observe something, you reflect, you experience it, you reflect, and through that practice and actual direct experience of it, that's where the learning really takes place.
Then we will do research, so we will speak to people with the lived experience, and then we use those actual words in the script, so we craft it around the real experience, the real lived experience.
According to the NHS, 1 in 3 of us suffer from poor sleep, and this can have a devastating effect on our lives.
I would go to bed early, wake up, and then just sort of lie in bed thinking I'm not getting to sleep, and that would just get me really wound up.
So if you improve sleep, you can see a commensurate reduction in depression scores or anxiety scores or pain scores. You actually feel less pain.
Lily uses Sleep Station. It's helped tens of thousands of people all over the world to tackle their sleep problems. Each person receives a personal sleep improvement plan along with the support and encouragement needed to implement it. Patients can record their sleep patterns.
You are assigned to a multidisciplinary team of coaches, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, but by delivering it digitally, it allows us to do it in a much more cost-effective way.
The programme has helped Lily and her family.
I just feel happier, in a better mood, just enjoy life more.
She's a lot calmer and more collected towards the whole entire family.
These players are on the Bradford Bulls Rugby League scholarship programme. Many are hoping to be the sporting stars of the future.
Obviously, I want to get to the Super League and represent my country one day.
Becoming an elite sports person is tough, not just on the body, but also on the mind. So you need to build up mental resilience.
There's a number of pressures, from selection, injury, recently through COVID and missing out on debuts, and they have to work away from the rest of the group so they can feel isolated, can get down because they're not doing the things that they love to do.
To tackle the problem, the players are taking part in a mental health programme for 14 to 18-year-olds called Your Resilience. It was created by Mental Health UK and delivered with Rugby League World Cup 2021.
Training 4 times a week and then exams every day, revising. It's been quite tough.
Jodie Cunningham knows pressure. She's a seasoned England international who's had to endure injuries.
We're at a really good point now where we're changing opinions that actually that time also needs to be invested in individuals in regards to looking after their emotional and mental health as well, and I think that is happening. We're on that journey now. There's still a way to go, but I think it's really important that people speak out, and programmes like this raise awareness.
COVID has brought a huge increase in the volume and complexity of calls from Bupa members to its family mental health line.
The pandemic's had a significant impact on people's mental health, and that includes children and young people. What we've seen particularly is the effect that the disruptions had on their routine and education and how they socialise.
And research commissioned by Bupa in the autumn of 2020 found 3 in 4 13 to 19-year-olds had experienced physical health issues related to poor mental health. Half had turned to harmful coping mechanisms, including drink, drugs, or self-harm to alleviate symptoms.
You always try and put some reason and rationale behind what's happening to your child. You wouldn't naturally think, oh, it's their mental health well-being. So it's specialist conversations that will be taking place to explore what's going on for that young person and what advice and guidance is needed.
Bupa is the only UK insurer offering ongoing support for mental health conditions and is expanding and upskilling its mental health team. Together All is an online mental health support service that has helped over 300,000 people to date. It allows people to realise that they're not alone, no matter what they're coping with.
As a service offering, we are a digital peer-to-peer platform that is available 24 hours a day that uses the power of community to help people deal with their anxiety and depression.
Together All is commissioned by organisations such as the MOD, universities and the NHS, which is under immense pressure dealing with the public's mental health.
I think it's so valuable because it's available immediately. If anybody comes to see me, for example, I can tell them about it and they could access it on their phone or tablet or computer straight away.
As a war guide, we are essentially there to create a safe and comfortable environment for all of our members. And we do that by staying really tuned into the community and what's happening. We need to be very aware of particular levels of distress amongst members if they're really struggling. We then need to have discussions and make decisions about how best to support those members.
Together All's members doubled in the last 18 months, and is expected to double again in the next 18 months. Also feeling the pressure are customer service staff. They need to be trained to deal with vulnerable customers, and new guidance from the Financial Conduct Authority emphasises a duty of care.
There is this lens of vulnerability which particularly the FCA and many other regulatory bodies across other utilities in particular are putting on service providers to say, have you done enough? Have you done enough to understand this person's circumstances? And if you haven't, then we're going to hold you to account for that.
VCX provides training for customer-facing employees and a live database that provides instant information to support the emotional needs of customers. Data shows focusing on employee well-being pays off.
So what I found was that over a 28-year period, companies that treated their employees well beat their peers in terms of shareholder returns by 2.3 to 3.8% per year. That's 89 to 184% compounded. So it finds that, simply put, companies that treat their workers better do better.
As well as the training modules, VCX also offers the Signpost database, which offers basic knowledge of hundreds of health conditions as well as life experiences.
When you're talking about vulnerable customers, you're also dealing with not people with just suicidal thoughts or mental health issues, but actual physical illnesses, which sometimes they tell you what the illness is and you're not a GP or any medical knowledge, you don't understand what it is. Something like the Signpost is really good because you can just basically click on it and have a real overall view without going into too much emotion about what that illness may be.
You okay? Yeah.
Max Chambers had serious mental health issues. His father and many friends had died, and COVID exacerbated his loss. He had to close his tattoo business, his income plummeted, and he worried he'd lose his home of 20 years.
I was having extreme headaches. I was really ill. 2 brain scans in the year. Called them cluster headaches, constant migraines. Couldn't sleep at night through the bad thoughts.
Max lives in a housing association property in Surrey run by Vivid. He was struggling to pay his rent and deeply in debt. The company's welfare rights advisor, Linda, helps tenants, advising them on benefits, debt and appeals.
We can help them get the benefits that they're entitled to that sometimes they're not claiming or that has been stopped when it shouldn't have been. For example, last week we got somebody just about £20,000 in arrears of benefits that they were owed, and something like that is really life-changing.
An amazing difference. A lot of the support I got, like bereavement counselling, I didn't even know it existed. And they directed me and helped me with all sorts of things and how to handle bills and how to, just there was a way to sort things out and move forward and help me mend myself, which is now, I'm at that point. It's brilliant. I don't know what I'd have done without them.
Thanks for joining me for this special showcase version of Forward Together for Mental Health. All the reports are now available in full on the Mental Health UK website. So from all of us here, thank you for watching. Goodbye.
Quite a lot to digest there, to say the very least. So we know the statistics. 1 in 4 of us experience poor mental health in this country every year. And supporting all of those individuals and the rest of the nation in keeping well is not something that Mental Health UK can do on its own. And so we set up a strategy, which we launched a little bit earlier on this year, which asked organisations and individuals to consider their unique contribution, to look inside, to consider their strengths and think about how they can play a role in protecting and maintaining our mental health. And I think there's been some great examples that you've seen there just now about how organisations are doing this. So we're going to start the question and answer session now, so we can dig into some of those examples in a little bit more detail. And David, I want to come across to you first, if I may. Your approach to mental health has grown over the course of our partnership, which has been in place now for the best part of 5 years. And it's multifaceted. It has so many arms and legs to it. It's truly all-encompassing. But from your point of view, what has the group done that's had the most tangible impact?
Yeah, sure. Well, you're right. I mean, there's an awful lot we can be proud about in terms of what we've achieved together, and it has. We've sort of ducked and turned and changed and evolved over the last 5 years. But the partnership we have with Mental Health UK is part of a broader strategy that the group has in terms of its mental health. And I think the thing that I'd focus in on, Katie, that has had the most impact is the cultural change that we've seen in the organisation. When we set out our mental health strategy way back 5+ years ago, we looked to raise awareness and to remove stigma within the organisation and beyond. And I think we've really done that. And that impacts massively on the way that we work, because we can have the sorts of conversations in the workplace that you've seen others talk about on the video we've just watched. That means that it's okay to talk about your mental health. It's okay to take time out. And I've talked to so many colleagues that have said, I just would not have been able to have these conversations some years ago, but now I can. It's okay to have that conversation. It's all right to talk about that. I feel comfortable doing that. So those open conversations, the space to take care of your own well-being, has actually fundamentally changed the culture within Lloyd's Banking Group. And this overflows into the way that we treat customers, because it gives you that greater awareness. It's a much more positive bringing together of home life and work life in a very good way. And of course, it does also raise awareness and increase the desire to fundraise for our partnership with Mental Health UK, which is part of the overall piece. So it's that cultural change, Katie, that I think has been the thing that I'm most proud about and the thing that's had the biggest impact.
Absolutely. And we'll be talking a little bit more about customers shortly, actually. But it's interesting hearing that. John, I wanted to ask you about culture as well, because you've had your credo in place, as we've just heard there, since 1943. So this is something that's been deeply embedded for you for a very long time. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you think this shapes your culture and the attitudes and behaviours that follow on, particularly in terms of mental health?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the credo is a set of guiding principles, essentially, that's on every wall in every J&J building across the world. And it acts as a North Star for how we conduct ourselves as a business. And it reminds us to tackle mental health specifically and foster an inclusive environment for a variety of different people through the 4 paragraphs of the credo itself. So the first paragraph is about doctors, nurses and patients, the people that actually use a lot of our products. And so we've done a variety of different things over the last 18 months, as well as through our pharmaceutical business, actually products that tackle depression, anxiety, and so on. But also for the nurses through the pandemic, we've held resilience booster sessions for people in the NHS throughout COVID, which have been really well received. The second paragraph talks about our employees, and from an employee perspective, it's been all about tackling stigma. We've got world-leading employee resources that people can access, but through the Alliance for Diverse Abilities, we've done a hell of a lot of work around stigma, which is great. The third paragraph is about communities, and so we tackle communities very specifically with our partnership with Mental Health UK. And then finally, the fourth paragraph talks to stakeholders, but from a business perspective, obviously, we invest a hell of a lot of money in research and resources for everyone associated with our mental health strategy.
So again, reaching out in so many different ways to so many different communities, and I guess really inviting everybody to recognise that in their daily do, which is fascinating. And you touched just there on the social impact work at Johnson & Johnson and Rhoda. I was wondering if you could sort of tell us a little bit more about how your sort of credo has shaped that and how colleagues engage with that directly and support as well.
Sure, Katie. Yeah, I think as John has said, obviously our credo is sort of the mandate at J&J in terms of how we do business, and it truly is, it's on the walls everywhere, but it's how we do business within the organisation. And as John said, sort of the third paragraph is what effectively talks about our community responsibility. And sometimes I joke that, that was built in all those years ago before CSR became what CSR is now, but it truly is embedded in the way that, we do business. The credo will compel us to be responsible to the communities in which we live and work, and to the world community as well. And so obviously that looks like strategic partnerships with Mental Health UK, like we saw in the video, the work that, we're supporting with the Community Navigator program, the phenomenal work that Teresa's doing, and and others like her in all the nations around the world. But we really, Katie, try and think of it, as you know, as a sort of 360 approach, so that it's not just about the funding and the support in that way, but how do we try and use our big for good as Johnson & Johnson? How do we use the skills and the expertise of our employees to help give back as well? So, you know, the program that we run is called Talent for Good, which effectively looks at, you know, how do we, you know, encourage our employees to use their skills, their talents, their knowledge to give back to society and to communities. And people can do this basically along a spectrum, right from, you know, fundraising support, advocating for a cause for the local communities that they support or NGOs that they support in localities close to them, all the way through to, you know, what we call capacity building. So thinking about, you know, employees engaging with NGOs and thinking about how they might, you know, want to maybe increase their social media presence, or, you know, thinking about supply chain opportunities and how they can kind of help support that organization to increase their impact. But what's really good is that, you know, when we see employees give back in that way, we see a strong correlation to their own sense of well-being. So employee sense of well-being, their sense of pride, their sense of belonging, their sense of almost using their own skills and developing themselves personally and professionally as well. You know, you hear people talk about teamwork as well, particularly if they're going to do things as teams. You know, it really has it's a win-win overall in terms of the NGO benefiting, those that they're supporting benefiting, the employee themselves benefiting, and of course the organization benefiting as well. I mean, the number of times I'll have a conversation with someone, you know, saying, even during, you know, while we've been working virtually, saying they've had a busy day, there's lots going on, but they've, you know, taken half an hour out of their day to mentor a young person or support a social entrepreneur or give back, and what that puts back into the bank for them is significant. So yeah, we like to think about it from a sort of 360 perspective, and, you know, how we use the breadth of what we have at our disposal to support the work of charities and NGOs and the great work that you guys are doing.
Absolutely, and I'm really pleased there that you use the word pride, because I think that's something that is so intrinsically important in this. And, you know, if you look at sort of the journey of Johnson & Johnson over the past 18 months, obviously you've been part of the, you know, the drive for the resolution, the solution to COVID-19 in developing a vaccine through Janssen. And obviously there will have been lots of members of staff across the organisation that will have been involved in that, but that's only sort of, you know, one single tranche of what the business does, and will generate a sense of pride for those who were involved in that. But actually, in terms of the rest of the community and all of those skills that you have across Johnson & Johnson, you've really opened the doors for everybody to get involved in a way that's meaningful for them. So it's not just about the unique contribution of the organisation, thinking about what you have as a brand, what you do as your business, but as you said, sort of encourage the individuals within the organisation to look inside themselves and go, actually, do you know what, I'm really good at marketing. I could go and help a charity in that regard and really pump out the message about mental health. So I really like that. I think it is important to recognise the value of pride and actually how that can sort of really, you know, pump positivity through people as well. Chris, I wanted to come over to you next. We've just been talking to an organisation who has been thinking about its positive impact on mental health since 1943. You're a much younger organisation, I know, who's sort of relatively new in the marketplace, and we've just heard a little bit there through the video about what it is that you're doing and supporting a wide range of organisations. But I was wondering if you could bring that to life for a little bit more and tell us about how VCX supports organisations.
Certainly. Thank you, Katie. And it's a great watch again, seeing the diversity across organisations that this program has pulled together. And what VCX does is it stands for Vulnerable Customer Experience. We come out of a financial services background where there was regulation put around consumer protection, and vulnerability and mental health are inextricably linked. Our mental health underpins everything, particularly it has relations to our financial security. And one of the things that we experienced in delivering training around vulnerability was that in an attempt to protect consumers, we were actually putting customer service staff within organizations under an awful lot of pressure that they weren't used to dealing with. For example, if you worked in a bank and you were renewing insurance policies all day long, and you suddenly have a remit to understand what's going on in a customer's broader life, not just their financial life, and that might be they might be going through a relationship breakdown or a bereavement, or be diagnosed with a mental health condition or a physical health condition. And the expectation coming from a regulatory point of view is that you need to do a bit more to understand. You can't just kind of stay focused on selling policies anymore. We need to understand, is this the right policy for that person based on their broader sense of their life experience? And that's a great thing. And I think we're all customers. And if you start from that perspective, then that's a good place of initial understanding. And then you have to understand that we're also all vulnerable. And I think vulnerability is a word that gets bandied around. And if you're not careful, it can be there's the vulnerable and then there's us. And it's perceived as a niche element of customer service. But what the FCA tried to do, and a number of other regulators as well, but particularly the FCA, because that's the background that we come from, they said that 50% of the UK population are susceptible to one of their characteristics of vulnerability. So it became a mainstream conversation. It became an everybody conversation. And the way that gets sort of translated within organizations is critical. And for organizations like Johnson & Johnson and Lloyd's that we've heard that are very sort of values-driven organizations, that message will sort of fit in with their values. But if you're an organization which is purely driven around shareholder returns and short-term KPIs and hitting the numbers, then that's a very difficult conversation for a customer service colleague to now have with a customer, because they don't have the time and they don't have the skills to really dig into that depth of what's happening for a person and as an individual. And what we found is that if that's not implemented well, then the mental stress that gets put on the colleague is this, you become emotionally overwhelmed. They didn't come to work to have 50 conversations with people about their vulnerabilities and the complexities of their situation. And the pandemic's shown us one thing: we know that things get complex very quickly. So it is about delivering training to actually understand what those values are and how we can actually connect with the customer as the colleague. Now, it's a humanity-based e-learning program that says, if we really care and if we bring compassion to work with us and we actually want to make a difference, then we can do that by speaking to customers. And we can transform people's lives by connecting them to people that can help them, because as a bank or a pharmaceutical company, you may not be able to deal with exactly what's happening for that customer. But if you're well connected and you know where to point people, then you can put them in the direction that people can have a transformative effect on their lives. And that's what the signpost does. The signposting was a term that the FCA introduced. I'm sure it's across many other industries. It says if you can't help somebody, then you should do everything you can to help that person. You need flexible organizations that can be agile and can deal with an individual rather than a whole customer base. But if you can't, then have the confidence to say, we actually know an organization that might be able to help you. And have you thought about speaking with them? And we have some details. And what we found was that's a great principle. But if you don't have any kind of list of who to signpost to, what happens is somebody discloses something to you on a call that you weren't expecting. You chuck it into Google, you're overwhelmed with information, nothing's been particularly verified. So what we did was develop this database of vulnerability and signposting to be able to say that if you're having a conversation with a customer that you weren't expecting, that is difficult, that one, you can understand what it is, but also you can understand how to support that customer. And on the other side of that, there's a number of questioning frameworks which have become sort of standard within the industries. And that's how to scaffold that conversation. Because at the point that we need to be at our most compassionate, when somebody discloses something to us that we're not expecting, it's at the point that we feel with the greatest anxiety. And that can be very serious. If somebody discloses the intent to self-harm or is potentially in a suicidal situation, you need to have some structure in order to be able to manage that process, because those people that are having those conversations, if they work for the Samaritans, they do it day in, day out. If they work for a bank, then they don't. And that's where we're really trying to provide the tools, not just to support the customer, but to protect the colleague from being overwhelmed and the risk which is being brought into the business by actually asking our own staff to open up those conversations.
And I think what you've really sort of brought to life for me in amongst that is in recognising what your role can be for individuals as an organisation isn't necessarily asking you to take on the responsibility for the solution, but it's about those, in your instance, the number of conversations a member of staff at a bank, for example, would be having with a customer over a period of time, and spotting some of those signs and making appropriate signposting. Actually, that's sort of one step further to us all being able to better support each other and get them to the solution that they're looking for. And I'm really interested, Chris, how have things changed in your view as a result of the pandemic? You mentioned just there that circumstances for individuals are far more complex, but is there anything else that we're seeing?
I think definitely the biggest change is the fact that we specialize in the customer service conversation. So we're always used to operating in call centers, whether they be large call centers in the UK or not in the UK. Now that there's so much work from home being done, I think that's a massive challenge, because when you're managing teams of customer service agents, if they have a tough call, if there is a situation where as an agent you are overwhelmed and on the other side you've been abused by a customer, you can be very upset. And in a call center setting, it's pretty obvious. You see people slamming phones down or putting their arms in the air or despairing. And at that point, a manager or a colleague has the opportunity to put their arm around somebody or take them for a cup of tea or just discuss that and give them the time and the space to kind of process what's just happened. And our biggest concern is that that's now not happening, because that sense of community around people and the support that's available in face-to-face business environments isn't there. So you can be having these conversations. And I know a lot of people that moved off of one set of financial services products and they went into work for organizations having conversations about putting payment holidays in place during the pandemic. Now that's a very different set of questions and conversations. It will be like working almost in the collections industry. The percentage chance of you having a highly emotional conversation with somebody who cannot pay their bills, who struggles to figure out whether or not they're going to lose their house, is a hugely emotionally demanding situation. And because you can't see people, because they're not in front of you, because you don't have the opportunity to just grab people into a room and say, let's talk about something for 10 minutes, which isn't work. Let's just say what's actually happening for us here. So I think that's the biggest change and the biggest concern. And why, a solution like the Signpost, which is an online, immediately available solution, at least it gives somebody a crutch to lean on when they're having that conversation.
And David, listening to Chris just there and everything that he's had to share about the experiences they've seen from BCX point of view, I'm interested to know what Lloyd's Banking Group has learnt over the past couple of years and how you've adapted, in particular over the pandemic and that sort of move to remote working to support your colleagues and customers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two things. First of all, Chris, absolutely endorse what you said there. We think the exact same thing in terms of the impact on customers, and that sort of the connection between mental health and money worries, money concerns is huge. And just to wind back to the beginning of our partnership with Mental Health UK, that's why we set up the Mental Health and Money Advice Service in the first place, because we recognised that there needed to be a specialist signpost team that were equipped really to deal with customer in those extreme circumstances. But we recognise that before we get to a point of referral to a service like that, as Chris said, there are a number of conversations that go on in our telephony team branches as well, particularly online, where you're dealing with some very traumatic situations. And so two sides to that, really. One is, as Chris has described, training colleagues to actually know how to signpost, how to have those conversations. But the thing I want to particularly look at is the impact that has on colleagues as well, because they can have a number of these conversations back, and particularly in a call centre, you've not usually got built in that time to sit back and reflect on what you've just said, just straight onto the next call. And it can be quite traumatic and actually have a significant impact on the colleagues that are dealing with these conversations. So we've recognised that, and recognised in particular that as a result of the pandemic, these conversations are going to continue. And we absolutely, and you all I'm sure know this, that we've not seen probably a half of the fallout from the pandemic. There's still quite a lot of support in place, and as time goes on, we will see businesses fail. We will see people struggling with their finances for a long time to come. And so these conversations are going to continue. So what we've done is we're in pilot phase, but we've recognised that we need to give some additional support to our colleagues that are having the conversation. So what we've done is we've worked again with Matthew, brought a couple of their colleagues into Lloyd's banking, have been seconded full-time in, and they're working alongside our customer-facing teams to actually be there, to be part of that community. They've got the expertise around mental health and around talking that through with our colleagues that are having the conversation. And it might be just a big part of that team and being advised and support, but there's also an ability for, if you like, for want of a better word, a deep dive debrief on that conversation if colleagues need that. So we've essentially brought in and built in a support network specifically for colleagues that are having those difficult conversations. Now, as I said, it's still a pilot. We're working that through, but already we're seeing there's a lot of benefit from that, and colleagues are able to offload the experiences that they've had, get it a bit more in perspective, and then they're in turn therefore much more effective when it comes to dealing with the next colleague. They've a bit more training, but they've also been able to download their own experience. If you like, it's in mental health circles or counselling circles, you'd call it supervision, and I suppose it is sort of that. There's that ability just to say, I've had this, I've been through this, it's pretty tough. Chris outlined a number of the scenarios you might come across, and just to be able to share that with someone else. So I think it's been great to see that. We'll see where that goes, but there's a clear need for it. And it's to Katie's point, it's been one of the areas that we've evolved very recently and said, actually, we need a fresh level of support for our colleagues because of what's coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to seeing more on that one, David, because I think that approach to looking at the colleague well-being, over quite a prolonged period of, engagement with customers in the fashion that we've seen over the last 18 months, it's a really interesting model. And I definitely look forward to talking about that one more. I've got some amazing questions that have come in from the audience, and I do want to crack through some of those. So we'll come to sort of some wrap-up questions, I think, a little bit later on. But we've had a really interesting question here, which, Rhoda, I think I'm going to pass this one over to you, if that's okay. So it's from an individual who says that in our organisation, we've been focusing on colleague wellbeing for quite some time, and we think we're on a good journey there, but we would like to do more and reach out into our community. How did you choose, as an organisation, what to do for the wider society?
Okay, very, very good question. I think, in terms of, looking at, how you think about sort of what community organizations you support, I guess it starts with mission and purpose overall. Then it's, trying to understand, what is the wheelhouse of the organization, the organization that you're in, what is the extension of what your business is in terms of how that can impact society. So we're a healthcare organization, thinking about healthcare, community, mental health. Where are some of the gaps? Where are some of the needs? Where are some of the gaps from an equitable perspective as well, in terms of thinking about the healthcare spectrum? We know that there's a gap in mental health, for example, compared to some physical health areas. So that then starts to kind of guide you around to say, okay, well, here is where society's needs meet where our expertise is, and then you start to form partnerships or collaborations with those organizations. And that might be sort of on a national scale, or you might also look at it in the context of saying, okay, where am I based? What's the locality that I'm based in? And if you can actually find a hybrid between that. So for example, at J&J, we're obviously a global organization based in the UK. We've got a number of sites in different places around the UK. So it's saying, actually, what are the themes overall? We see that mental health is a key one. We see that, for example, supporting frontline healthcare workers is critical, particularly in terms of the last year and a half that we've come through. And then starting to say, how does that kind of ladder up into our overall mission? So how can we create a plan or a strategy that would support those organizations, but that would go beyond just fundraising or support from that perspective? How can we use the skills of our employees, or maybe there's some expertise we have within the organization to do that as well? And then I think it's them kind of putting, principles in place as to how that will be. So for example, I've talked about our employee volunteering plan, setting up systems and processes that will enable your employees to do that. So we have a volunteering policy at J&J that gives employees up to 5 days off a year to volunteer for organizations. It's paid time off. People can support their local charities that are in their vicinity, or they can do it on a national level as well. So it gives the employee the safety almost to be able to say, well, my company's supporting me to do this. I'm going out to make a difference. And effectively, that's how you have the catalyst effect. I think the other thing I'd say is leadership needs to be fully engaged in it as well. We've talked about culture just now. It's got to start from the top as well. So leaders have got to be invested, engaged in it, and also lead by example as well in the context of how you look at community support. There's a lot more to say on this, but hopefully that
Yeah, I know it's our favourite topic, but 3 key takeaways I think I took from you there, Rhoda, is the importance of leadership, the importance of collaboration. You don't have to have the answer yourself. Come and speak to people like ourselves at Mental Health UK, and giving permission to colleagues as well to engage in a way that suits them. Great, thank you. I've got 2 fairly similar questions here, so I'm going to try and sort of amalgamate them together. And David, I think these are probably best placed with you. One says that they work for a local authority and have several different departments who are notoriously hard to reach with information because they don't have the time or opportunity to access the intranet. Any suggestions on better reaching these groups? And then similarly, another question that I've had come through is around colleagues who aren't desk-based, so working in depots, shop floors, branches on the road. Again, how do you ensure that everybody feels included?
Yeah. It is a hard one. I accept that people have got different jobs. We've got the same issue, particularly with branch colleagues, and you get communications up there. I think it's probably quite a complex sort of answer in the sense that it really is to do with the whole communications policy around the organisation. But I think that one of the key things that I would advise in that circumstance is to target your key leaders, because there's no question that what we've seen at Lloyd as an example is that it's as these messages, this cultural change has been brought down from the top and been very much led from the top, that it's actually changed things. So I think, if you're coming in at the sort of more junior levels in the organisation, then they are constrained by their work priorities, by their workload, and potentially by senior leaders who are not supporting. If you work it the other way around, actually you're setting culture from the top, and therefore what we found is that the senior leaders are then making the time for these conversations and for this communication. So it's a very complex issue, this, about communicating particularly new concepts into organizations. But I think the simplistic, and I accept that it is, but the simplistic answer is you've got to work top down, because it's about cultural change rather than just simply how do you get the message to the right place.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And I really hope that for the individuals that have sent that one through, that can provide some support there, because it is a tricky challenge, without doubt. And I think probably not just one that we're experiencing in mental health as well. If we had the silver bullet for that, I'm sure everybody would be copying us. A couple more questions here before I'm going to start to endeavour to bring us to a close, albeit I'm sure we could talk about this conversation for a very long time. Chris, if I can bring one over to you. With the organisations that you're working with, do you find any resistance from their staffs and colleagues in talking about mental health and talking to their customers about mental health? And what do you think are sort of the key tips in convincing them that this is the right thing to do?
Yes, in an answer, there is resistance, because if you don't have the right attitude and you don't have the right training, then it's a difficult and somewhat an unfair situation to put somebody in. Our experience is the best way to turn that around is to celebrate what's going well. Because if you come at it with an approach that I can't do that, I don't have the capacity to do that, there's too much of a challenge to me, you're impinging on my mental health by expecting me to look after somebody else's, if you see what I mean. But if we have environments, and when we were in offices, we did this to great effect, where we brought people together from the call center for 10, 15 minutes, and we played a couple of calls where people had offered the right support. They had shown compassion. They'd given the customer the extra couple of minutes to offload, to share. And then they'd done something which was really profound, in the sense that they just listened, and they said, you know, that's okay, and thank you for sharing. And I'm here to listen, and I'm here to support you in any way that I can. And the customers were so overwhelmed by that level of kind of understanding and willingness to just walk with them on that journey, that the feedback was very emotional. And when you hear those conversations, it takes something from a transactional to a relational way of doing business, and that's truly inspiring, and that's what we should be celebrating. And I think that the doubters, when they hear that, they feel a pull towards that.
So again, it's about leadership, if not from the top, leadership from within, leading by example, and demonstrating the good that can come. Because yes, I agree with you that there is undoubtedly resistance that can be met with this, and it's the fear of the unknown, isn't it? And actually drawing that line between how you can make a difference by signposting, rather than thinking that you need to provide the full solution.
Yeah.
And then finally, John, one last question for you. Has the pandemic given people permission to bring their whole selves to work? And is there a duty from employers and managers to make the time to understand people's situations as part of their one-to-ones or performance reviews?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pandemic has definitely opened people's eyes to their mental health, and more specifically, being able to provide opportunities to talk about our mental health. And so, you know, as line leaders, we've implemented a variety of different things. And to David's point earlier, I do think the line leader is the most important person in this strategy, because your experience of how the company deals with mental health is basically how you have an engagement with your line leader. So we encourage our line leaders to invite the conversation and talk about mental health on a spectrum from, you know, truly thriving to genuinely struggling. And so providing language, whether it's 1 to 10 or anything, to talk to that really helps people have that conversation, which is so important.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I've got one final question here, which I'm actually going to take the chair's liberty of answering myself. It says, as a small organisation, we have limited resources. Do you have any tips of making an impactful contribution to mental health, being a small fish in a big pond? And I think my response to that will be yes. You've heard some examples here today, and you'll see through the ITN production some quite large organisations who do have that UK-wide footprint. And you've also sort of listened to Chris, who's an emerging fish in the pond around, you know, how you can engage with other organisations to make systemic change. But I think for me, it's about recognising what your community is. And if you have a UK-wide or a global community, then that's a great place for you to respond. But if you are a small organisation or a local organisation, don't underestimate the impact that you can have to the people around you. We're not looking for everybody here to have that UK-wide societal response, because there are so many things that need to be done. We need to have as many plates spinning as possible. And if you don't know where to start on that journey, then please come and talk to us about it. We've got lots that we can offer into the conversation there. And with that answer, I'm just going to ask everybody if they could perhaps give me sort of a 30-second to 1 minute piece of advice for anybody who's listening in today. And go around you all individually to offer to organisations starting out on their mental health journey, either for staff or wider society. What would be the one piece of advice that you would give? And perhaps David, if I could start with you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and it's this. I think you need a clear focus. So it's there's mental health is a massive issue across our society, and it could be quite daunting. So focus in on the one thing you can make a difference into, and stick to that. And if you can tick that box, you can move on to the next thing. So don't try and do too much at once. Would be my advice.
Absolutely. I feel like I've said that to a few organisations this week already. Don't boil the ocean. Rhoda, may I ask you?
It's a bill, but I would say prioritize it. I don't think gone are the days when it's kind of like, okay, let's think about how this is going to work. It's got to be prioritized now. Like the last year and a half in particular, it's so every organization needs to prioritize it. And to David's point, start with what you have. Like, even if it's a small thing, as long as you say, we're putting a stake in the ground to prioritize this for our organization, however small you start, as long as there's a focus on prioritization, I think that's key.
Great. And Chris?
Yeah, I think it's about creating the environment in which people feel safe to be able to have conversations with customers and with colleagues. I think the program, the Bloom program, really kind of summed it up for me. There's no point in creating resilience if we put people in environments where they can't be resilient because they're under too much pressure.
Absolutely. I like that. That's one of my favourites, creating those environments for people to thrive. And finally, John. I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's all about inclusion. And so that comes from psychological safety. So for me, it's about talking to each other and telling stories. And it doesn't always have to be the really challenging story. Just getting to know each other really creates that inclusive environment. It's going to encourage employees to be able to have the more challenging conversation should they want to.
Great, thank you. There's a lot of information there for everybody who's been listening in. We will follow up with the recording of this, so if you want to listen back to any of the content, you're very welcome to, and we will also be sending round the link to the full 1 hour programme that we've produced in partnership with ITN as well. But I want to thank everybody for listening today and to thank our panellists for taking part. As I said, we could have carried on this conversation for at least another hour, but we'll call it a day there. Our next webinar is going to be taking place on Friday, the 5th of November at 10 a.m. And we're moving from the strategic to the practical, where we'll be talking about how to talk to your line manager about your mental health for the first time. And we've got a really great panel for this session as well. I'll be joined by Nikki Garcher-Davies and Noah Yip from Lloyd's Banking Group, who will be talking about their story as colleague and as line manager. And we'll also be joined by our very own Emma Carrington, who is our colleague mental health support lead from Mental Health UK to give their perspective on it as well. So look forward to seeing you all there, and we'll send around the link for that webinar in the email that goes out with this one today. But I wish you all the very best for the rest of your Thursday and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.